Manager, Substance Use Support Specialist with Betty Ford Foundation.
Hazelden Betty Ford.
Hazelden Betty Ford, I have that.
Okay. Yeah.
I just didn't say it.
Okay.
Hello, thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Liz Burgard, Parent Involvement Coordinator. Welcome to our 6th of 7th Parent Engage 360 events for this year. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here this evening. The format for tonight will begin with Colleen O'Neill and Cindy Doth sharing information for about the first 45 minutes around chemical health. Then we'll move into a panel of experts of community members, staff, and students that are here to share additional information of the questions that were submitted for those who registered for the event this evening. We have participants here in person, and we also have people streaming online. This presentation will be recorded, and we will be following up tomorrow by sharing the recording, a survey, and other relevant information with people who have registered for the event this evening. Take it away, Colleen and Cindy.
All right, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being present this evening on this wonderful, beautiful, gorgeous April evening. I am Colleen O'Neill. I am the Chemical Health Prevention Specialist for the district. I am a licensed alcohol and drug counselor and a certified prevention professional. And with me tonight presenting is...
I'm Cindy Doth with the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation. I too am a licensed alcohol and drug counselor as well as a licensed professional clinical counselor.
So tonight we just really want to share some pretty basic information for you. Information that we hope is going to be beneficial for you to share with your child, and information as parents that will give you some,
guidance, tips, and tricks.
Yeah, exactly. So tonight we're going to cover why this is important. We're going to talk about facts, perception, and brain development. We're also going to talk about if this really does or does not affect you as a family. We're also going to talk about breaking down the stigma around addiction and substance use. And then the last part, we want to talk about vaping. So the first section is, why is this important? I do want to cover a few facts, do want to cover perception, and I want to talk about brain development for teens.
So it's important to recognize that not everybody uses substances. The majority of people, the majority of adolescents, the majority of students really don't use substances. And so I think it's important to recognize that as caregivers, as professionals, we want to make sure that we can do what we can to continue that trend. We also know, though, that 90% of adults who use substances began before the age of 18. And so this then becomes a prime opportunity for us to make sure that we're giving you the information, the support and the guidance, that if you suspect that there might be any kind of substance use, that we're helping guide some of your directions. We also know that teens who begin using substances before their brain is fully developed increase their risk of having difficulties with substance use farther down the road. And so, again, the earlier that we can help intervene and identify, the better the outcome for young people.
I do want to add to that too, Cindy, is that the reason why we offer substance use or chemical health support in the schools is so we can help redirect and take that 90% and hope to lower that so our young people don't have a life of addiction. Because for those people, those adults that do struggle with addiction, I think we can both agree that a lot of times they're saying, if I had something in school, if I had people that I could talk to about this in school, this might look different for me.
So if we take a look at starting out at some of kind of the basic information around substance use, it's important to identify that when substances are used, that they impact the brain, they impact many organs within the body, including the lungs. And the younger that a person uses, how that can really damage and have an impact on their overall general health. Substances impact the communication center within the brain. And so we've got a quick video here that will help kind of elaborate a bit more on that adolescent brain development and the importance of being able to intervene early.
Age matters. Adolescent
So I do want to talk about perception. And this slide shows that, contrary to popular belief, not everyone is doing it. Not every student in high school uses substances. And I really want to focus on that, and I really want to drive that fact home, because as a parent, as an educator, even as a teen, you go into the buildings, and if you ask kids or teachers or coworkers, is everybody using? The answer is often yes, everybody's using. But the fact of the matter is, not everybody is using. We have the Minnesota Student Survey. It comes out every 3 years. The last one, and the one that this data was pulled from, was the 2019 Minnesota Student Survey. Now that survey, help me out here, I think it's 5th, 8th, 9th, and 11th grade students. So it's not every grade, it's not every student, but it is a huge snapshot for our district and other districts in the state. And so when you look at that, and I want to kind of point out that actual use is way lower than perceived use. So if we look at tobacco, for example, well, actually, let's look at e-cigarettes. 8.8% of students identified on the last survey, the 2019 Minnesota Student Survey, that at some point they did use an e-cigarette. But the belief is that close to 65% of students are using e-cigarettes. So I think it's important that we kind of shift that perspective and talk more about and give credit to those that don't make the choice to use, and focus on why they choose not to use, but others might. I think that helps drive our conversation, and it also helps make sure that we're talking about the reality rather than what we think is actually happening. Another one I want to point out is marijuana. We had 5.6% of students that identified use, and the truth is 47% don't. And so, when I meet with students and students are telling me everybody is using, I always just say, well, let's talk about that a little bit. Let me just kind of give you the facts. And of course, they come back at me and they'll say to me, well, not every student is honest on this. Not every student is taking that test, or kids are lying. But even if we look at that, and even if we factor that in, the numbers are too far apart to really say that everybody is using.
And Colleen, the part that I would even add to that as well is that when we look at this data, the Minnesota Student Survey is a very reputable survey, and this data also mimics the data that we see from other studies that are done on a national level. And so when we look at some of those national averages, we see the same kind of outcomes as well.
Absolutely. All right, so here are the facts. This is what we do know. Age of first use matters. If we can delay age of first use, we can take that 90% figure that we shared with you, and we can decrease that. We also know that drugs can hijack the brain. By using at a younger age, it primes the brain for wanting more of the substance, thus leading to addiction. And not everyone is doing it, as the 2019 Minnesota Student Survey shows. All right, we're going to move into the second section, which is, this really doesn't affect my child, or does it? Could my child be at risk? How do you protect your child from substance use? And then really, what is co-occurring disorders? This is really an important section, I think, for parents, because I'm a parent of 3 kids in their 30s. And I just hate saying that out loud, but I am. Anyways, and I remember having conversations with my kids, but I also remember having like one 60-minute conversation with my kids, feeling like, okay, we're good. I had the talk, we're good. But in truth, if you can have 60 one-minute conversations with your kids, the impact is even that much greater. And I think for me, even doing what I do, having that conversation was difficult because I didn't really want to know the truth, if that makes sense. So I think this is really important to know how to have the conversation and then kind of look at what measures should be in place to help support them delaying their age of first use.
So if we start to take a look at what are risk factors, when we start talking about substance use, it's hard to then not talk about risk factors of what is it that could put somebody at risk for using substances over somebody else. Risk factors are those events that could dictate or increase or influence the likelihood of somebody then using substances or then developing a substance use disorder. And so an example of this might be, I've had a super stressful day at work. Things are just not going my way. I'm so stressed out. My boss is yelling at me. Everything is super chaotic. I come home and I'm like, I just need a glass of wine, right? And so then I sit down and I have my glass of wine and I'm talking about my day and I'm like, oh, this feels so much better. Thank you. Woo, just what I needed. Now the intent is, as an adult, I can find lots of different coping skills. And the message that this may also send to my younger people at home, right? I have a 12-year-old and I have an 8-year-old, is a way to relax, a way to manage your feelings, a way to manage your stress is to drink alcohol. This by no means is the direct message that I'm providing to my children, but it implies that this is something that you can do to help yourself feel better. With a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old, not the message that I'm interested in sending. I'd rather have them learn to, let's take some deep breaths, right? Let's maybe change my clothes, or let me go take a shower and wash the ick off. And again, like Colleen had said, having those 1-minute conversations 60 times around other coping skills in itself can be a protective factor. When we look at those risk factors, we can also look at them in a variety of different ways. We can see that there's some genetic risk factors, right? That somebody might just be genetically predisposed to using substances, that there is a parent, a grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, somewhere within the genetic history has struggled with substances, and that can increase the likelihood of somebody then also using. We also know that the environment that we are in can influence increase that risk, or the surroundings that we're in. If we are in very stressful, traumatic, chaotic environments, or there's this easy access to substances, that environment that we're in increases the risk of developing a use disorder. We also can identify that there are some individual risk factors about like our person individual, like our psychology, of how it is that we are interacting directly with the world. What do my relationships look like? If I've got some really healthy relationships, or maybe my relationships are very strained and chaotic, lots of drama and tension. The relationship with caregivers can also be a huge influence. If there isn't this attachment, if there isn't interest and engagement with caregivers, that can also increase the likelihood of somebody turning to substances, developing a use disorder. And so looking at these risk factors becomes really important so that we can do what we can to try to reduce them, minimize them, so that we can shift and increase protective factors.
Mm-hmm. I also kind of want to talk about the individual risk factors, and this kind of goes back to that data that I shared. If you have a student and all of their friends are using, of course they're going to think everybody's using, because in their circle, in their environment, everybody is. And so therefore, they think that that circle is everything and everyone, and it's really not. And I also know we can say to them, hey, maybe find a different group of friends. Okay, well, of course, then they look at you like you just grew horns and you turn green on them, you know, and the reality is that's not an easy thing to do. So then how do you help them navigate if they have a group of friends that use and they are choosing or wanting to not use? And so that's where those 1-minute conversations really come in, just to check in. So I want to talk a little bit, excuse me, about protective factors. Protective factors are actually those things that are in place that help reduce the risk of substance use. They help you refrain from use, they help you feel supported, and they allow you to have healthy connections with others. So the 3 areas that really are huge in protective factors are family support, self-regulation, and school connection. So when we look at that family support, Cindy, that kind of goes back to, you know, even that example you gave, while the intent is never to have it be a negative comment that you want to have a glass of wine, recognizing that that could be perceived as a risk factor for the younger people in your family will help you kind of reframe that. And that really, I think, lends to family support. Being aware of that and then changing your own behavior really, I think, shows strength in family support. Self-regulation, this is a big one. You know, we're coming off of, 2 years of kids kind of having chaotic learning environments. And so the ability to self-regulate, even the ability to recognize when to change that behavior or the attitude, I mean, that's kind of a struggle for kids right now. You know, they haven't been in a school environment to help that be supported for them. And then, do they have coping skills? Well, a lot of kids are just kind of like, I don't even know what coping skills are. So I think it's just really important to be able to say, okay, first thing, pull back from it. You know, take a deep breath. Figure out what those coping skills are and create a list, put it on your phone. And it's not a magic thing. There isn't a magic coping skill that works for everybody. You might have to cycle through 10, 15 coping skills before you find the one that fits you. But I think as parents, as family, support, caregivers, I think that's really important to help them figure out what those coping skills are. And then school connection, school connectedness. This can look very different for every student. It doesn't mean you have to play on a sports team. It doesn't mean you have to be on the National Honor Society. It just means that you feel valued and you feel connected to the building that you're at, the building you're spending the majority of your time. And then within that building, do you have a connection with a supportive adult? We've got some fabulous staff in this district, and we have a lot of kids that really find connection with an adult in the building. And for those kids, that could be a coping skill. When they're feeling unregulated and they don't know how to get back to being regulated, they can reach out to that adult. And then connected to supportive friends. I think that's huge too. It's hard to instill in young people the ability to do things maybe differently than your group, but then giving them that skill to be able to know when to pull back and then surrounding themselves around supportive friends. I think that's huge.
One of the things that I would add around a protective factor that kind of touches on both the family support and even with some self-regulation, adolescents may not always find themselves in situations that they can predict, right? Like they want to go, they're going to hang out with a couple of friends, they're hanging out at a party, there was no discussion of having substances involved, but then they find themselves in a situation where a vape is now being passed around, right? That they're offered a blunt or some kind of substance. Being able to have kind of that candid conversation with your young person of, what do you think you might do in a situation if you were offered? Can be a really great conversation starter for those young people of kind of putting the power to that young person to make a healthy decision, right? Mm-hmm. Also, having the family support in such a way of, if you find yourself in a situation that you need to get out of, you call me, you text me, you go find a trusted person that can also help get in contact with me and let me help you get out of it. I will call and I will tell you that I need you home right now, right? Having a code word, right? Oftentimes at our house it's rhinoceros. but that means then that like there's some urgency to this and not having it be a, oh my, you found yourself in this situation and you're in so much trouble because you called for help and asked. I think it's really about reinforcing that pro-social-like behavior that also pulls that family system together and increases that ability for that young person to self-regulate, saying, I don't need substances to be able to self-regulate.
Right.
The other part that I would add around that self-regulation, given in part being in this pandemic, is that I've seen a lot of students have a struggle with even identifying that their emotions are all over the place. And so starting to be able to put words to it can be so helpful. Like, wow, you look really anxious, you look really sad. To help them identify and have that conversation can help teach that young person other ways to build up their own protective factors.
Right. And I also think from a parent perspective, I know that the phrase protective factor or risk factors is like a mouthful. And it's kind of almost clinical in a sense. But the fact is, when you understand what each of them are, I think you can look at, your own family, you can look at your own way of parenting and understand what is healthy and what maybe could be changed. And I think that's just key. What works in my family might not necessarily work in Cindy's family or in any of your families, but I think it's just knowing, having the conversations, understanding it, and, you know, connecting the dots.
Mm-hmm. So I started out as a licensed alcohol and drug counselor 16 years ago. And probably about 7 years ago, recognized that there was this significant relationship between substance use and mental health. Went back, got a second master's degree to address mental health. And what we've seen over the years, what the studies continue to report, is that there is this really enmeshed relationship between substance use and mental health. Where one goes, the other comes. Mm-hmm. And really oftentimes in talking with families, they are very interested in finding out the root cause of, the reason why something is happening. That they may chase the mental health world when maybe it's a substance use issue, or they might chase a substance use issue when there's mental health stuff going on. The reality is they mask and mimic each other all the time, and they influence each other, they create each other. And so anytime that we have conversations around substance use, it's crucial that we also talk about mental health. Addressing both at the same time becomes best practice, so that we're not kind of chasing our tail and trying to address one when it's another one. When we look at some of those signs and symptoms, many of the students that I end up meeting with will talk about how it is that they may use to manage their anxiety. Smoking weed makes me feel better, it makes me feel less anxious. So they see this as now their new coping skill and their way to get along. Hence, then the need to build up those protective factors. We also know that substance use can really trigger and intensify all of those feelings, right? I have met with several students that have struggled with anxiety and then find themselves drinking a ton of coffee and caffeine, right? Which then we also know increases that sense of anxiety as well. And so one ends up creating the other. Often associated with depression and increased anxiety, those that also have underlying anxiety disorders, and depression goes hand in hand. They are best friends, the substance use and the mental health.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Cindy, I think one of the biggest challenges is when students are identifying, they're being open about their use, but they're also saying, but it makes me feel better, or it allows me to get out of my head. It is really important to get them to understand that in that moment, it might make them feel better. In that moment, they might get out of their head, but the fact of the matter is, at some point that brain is gonna want more, and it's gonna just change its trajectory, and that is, in essence, the start of addiction, when the brain craves and you have to use in order to feel a certain way. There's a great video. It's called Nuggets, and I've got a resource at the end of this when we share the slides out. But I would really encourage you to watch it, because it just kind of shows, it's about 5 minutes, and it shows the progression of the first time you use to the point of it being a problem and the inability to pull back. And so for those kids that really struggle with some underlying mental health issues, it's really important to talk about both. It's really important to get those coping skills in there. And of course, kids they think, coping skills, give it to me, I'll put it in my back pocket, I got it, we're good. And so, no, I can list some coping skills with you, but you have to do the work and apply it. You have to figure out if it's actually gonna work for you. And come on, we're in a time where we want everything right now. And so it's really hard to pull them back and to practice. And that's why it's really important going back to those 1-minute conversations to check in about how are the coping skills going. My youngest daughter's 31. I mean, she learned coping skills or needed to use coping skills when she was in her late teens. She still uses those coping skills, and she knows when she gets to a point that she has to use them. And so those are skills that you're going to keep throughout your life. They may change a little bit, but it's really important that we help identify what they can be, because that will help with not just the substance use, but the mental health as well. All right, we're going to move into section 3, which is breaking the stigma. Is addiction stigma real? And then changing the perception by knowing the facts. All right, I want to talk a little bit about what stigma looks like. I think that top says it all. Stigma does equal shame. And I'm going to guess that every single one of us has felt shame at some point in our life. It's not a good feeling. We don't ever want to repeat it, so we do everything to avoid that feeling. But stigma is one of those things that is negative. And when we allow stigma to kind of dictate the way we look at people, talk to people, deal with people, it keeps people in a shame, kind of centered around shame. There are 3 different types of stigmas that I want to highlight. We have societal, we have self-stigma, and we have addiction stigma. Societal stigma is that stigma that I think it's probably safe to say we've all kind of found ourselves in situations where maybe that creeps up in our own being. But that's when members of the general public hold a specific view on a person's social, physical, or personal struggles. And let me give you an example. How many of you guys are driving? Get off on the freeway. You got somebody at the corner with a sign asking for money. We have an automatic stigma that we attach to that, right? And that's a societal stigma. The fact is, we don't know that story. We don't know what that person's going through. And so it's really important that if you find yourself kind of giving somebody that stigma label, that you kind of pull back for a little bit and recognize how that fits for them, what that feels like for them, and how that keeps them from looking for support. Then we have self-stigma. We do the same to ourselves. When someone with a mental health or a substance use issue internalizes that public stigma, it might keep you from seeking help. It might keep you from talking about it. And we wear that shame like a jacket. And then we have addiction stigma. When others view substance use as a lack of willpower, that one always gets me, lack of willpower, or a moral failing, and they hold negative beliefs regarding addiction. That's a tough one, because who then is going to be open about those struggles because of the way that either they themselves, their family, or society thinks about it? So I think it's just really important that we just break that down. And it's important that we talk about it and we don't place blame anywhere and we don't talk about it in a negative way.
Which is then where language that we use is super important, right? The words that we use of addressing any kind of substance use can have a really big impact one way or the other. So some alternatives, rather than saying addict, a user, a junkie, a druggie, which can have very shaming messages, maybe rather use person-first language. A person with a substance use disorder, a person who is struggling with substance use. These are people. And you know, the thing that always gets me around substance use is that it doesn't discriminate, right? That regardless of what you look like, how much money you have, what job you have, how many degrees, like substance use can still impact you. And so really having that person-centered first language can go a long way. A former addict, rather than saying a former addict, maybe again we refer to this person as a person in recovery. And you know, Colleen and I were talking earlier about even listening to how does that person identify themselves? What do they identify related to their use status? I think the idea of person first, the idea of recognizing that not everybody is the same. We can respect that stigma is an issue and take some steps to challenge that. Habit. Habit implies that a person is choosing to do this, choosing to use. And the reality is, when we start looking at that substance use disorder, never have I ever, in my 16 years of counseling anybody, never have I ever met anybody that woke up one day and said, I think I want to be a drug addict. I think I want to go to treatment. I think I want to use. I think I want to have all of these consequences. I'm going to start living my life that way. And so just shifting the language around somebody who's using substances, a substance use disorder, can take away that idea of this is a person's choice. A person is willingly doing this. The reality is, when a person starts to use, if they are predisposed to addiction, if they have those risk factors, that the addiction then takes over. That substance use takes over, and it can really wreak havoc. Rather than abuse, maybe we try the word misuse. Misusing prescription drugs, using illicit drugs. Abuse can really have, again, that kind of association with negative beliefs, punishment, that it's not abusing something, it's we're misusing it. We're not using it the way that it's intended.
All right, so this kind of recaps some of the stuff that we've talked about, that we know that substance use can impact the developing brain. We know that it primes the brain for wanting more, thus the path to leading to addiction. Substance use can also complicate or increase the risk of mental health disorders such as depression, anxiety. And one of the best ways to avoid addiction is to delay the onset of first use. So I think for me, and I don't know, Cindy, you might agree, but when I am speaking with somebody about their use, it's not about you have to do this or you have to do that. It's really about recognizing, pulling back, and for those that haven't started, it's understanding why it's to their benefit to not start. It's not saying you can't ever have a drink, or anything, but if we can teach them that to do so when their brain is fully developed, the likelihood of a problem decreases significantly. And then issues with substance use are not specific to any one individual or group, race, gender, or age group. It can happen to anyone. All right, so the last section that Cindy and I are going to cover is, let's talk about vaping, what you should know, school support, and community support. I think this is really important to highlight. And I want to remind everybody that vaping does affect everyone. When a student decides to use in school, in a class, you disrupt the entire class. And I want to talk about those kids that don't use and the struggles that they face in the buildings. They don't feel comfortable going to the bathrooms because they have to go through a group of people in order to get to a stall. They don't feel comfortable going down certain hallways because kids might congregate in a certain section of the building. They don't feel comfortable in locker rooms. They don't feel comfortable even going on the bus. And so, in truth, sure, you're using, it's affecting you, your body, it's your choice, but the fact is you've invited everybody to that party without them knowing it. So I think it's just really important to recognize that it can be somewhat selfish, especially when you choose to do it in areas where others don't want you to be doing it. So, I'm not sure how far, there we go. So I do, as I said, there's disruption in class, there's the inability to use bathrooms, and I think there's a lot of young people right now that have some really serious concerns for their friends because they recognize that their friends are at a point where it's problematic. And maybe it's changing your friendship. That's a tough thing for teens to understand and acknowledge. That kind of goes hand in hand with relationship struggles due to vaping. Relationships at home with your parents, with other people that love you, with boyfriend, girlfriend, your friends, your teachers, whatever. Any relationship can be affected negatively. Also, let's talk about the mood changes that create problems with others. There is negative effects to vaping. And some kids can react, and that changes their mood. But let's also talk about then if they're to the point that they feel they can't go an hour without, vaping or, whatever, and what that does to their mood, how they react. They get agitated, they get angry. And so that's where the mood really comes in. And then there's also that increased concern for parents and for teachers. The fact is, as adults, we have life experience. We know what is happening. We know where this can lead. So of course we react often in that way, but we have to kind of pull it back and, again, going back to those 61-minute conversations, have those conversations so they understand that concern from way back here instead of all of a sudden just reacting. So really, the big question is it worth it?
And so we probably already know this, but it is worth repeating. We know that vaping nicotine can increase those feelings of anxiety and amplify the feelings of depression. There was an anti-vaping commercial that I saw at one point that said, let's call it what it is, and it called it a depression stick. It called it a, anxiety pod, things of that sort. And that really does, it speaks truth to what vaping products offer. Tobacco and vape companies will do anything to get others and young people hooked to kind of perpetuate that cycle of using and increasing their user base. Nicotine creates that dopamine, which triggers that reward cycle within the brain that begins that cycle of cravings, increase in tolerance, and can lead to that struggle of substance use. And this is what addiction then looks like. When that dopamine, that reward cycle is triggered within the brain. Dopamine is that feel-good chemical in our brain, and when it's flooded, we really, really like this and we want more of it after it's depleted. And so we kick off that cycle over and over and over again.
And when we do that, when we're younger and our brain's not fully developed, we change the pathways.
Primes it for substance use.
Absolutely. So the one thing, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because it's fairly new and I am getting myself familiar with it, but it's synthetic nicotine. And it's fairly new. I'm going to see if Officer Weller might be able to talk about it a little bit when we do our panel, but synthetic nicotine is marketed as tobacco-free. So it's created in a lab. It's not derived from the tobacco leaf. Therefore, you can get around the FDA regulations. So guess who is finding the ways to do that? The nicotine tobacco companies. And so there is a loophole to allow them to continue selling flavored products. And I don't know how many of you are up to date on what the FDA regulations are around flavored vapes. A couple years ago, I think it must have been 2019, 18, 19, when vaping was really when we were really seeing a lot of effects. Kids were ending up in the hospital right before COVID, actually. So the nicotine companies really had to shift gears because they were losing a lot of money. And so this is a loophole that allows them to continue selling flavored products. Puff Bar is a disposable e-cigarette, and this is how they've been able to continue in some markets with flavored products. There's also nicotine pouches or lozenges, Velo, Zyn, On, there's some other brands, but these products use nicotine derived from tobacco. So there's a lot here to uncover. I do have some links at the end of this where you can go and get more information. And Truth Initiative is a great website to look at to give you some more information on just vaping in general. There's also, actually, I think we might be talking about it here. Yep, right here. There's a couple sites that I think are important for us to kind of keep out there and share with our students and with our children. But one is My Life, My Quit, and the other is This Is Quitting. They're both free and confidential ways to help you quit vaping. They're both app-based. and they can do it on their own. So it's not like they have to sit in front of anybody. They don't have to, pour their whole life out there. But it allows them the ability to start looking at ways to pull back. The fact of the matter is, I'm going to guess that we have a handful of kids that would, by all means, find themselves under the label of a substance use disorder. Nicotine, tobacco?
Nicotine,
Because of their use. And they might not even recognize that they're addicted. But these are great ways to just start having the conversation and allowing them some ability to look at their use, pull back, and at some point, hopefully abstain.
And one of the pieces that I would add to this too, as resources that I've given to students, I can think of many students that I've worked with over the course of multiple years who have expressed a desire to stop vaping. That they don't have any other use history or experiences, but specifically related to nicotine. I've always also encouraged them that if they can't get through that day without using, to consider talking to their pediatrician, talking with their provider. That recently I think it's the American Association of Pediatrics, I might have that title wrong, has permitted and encouraged the use of nicotine replacement therapy to address adolescent substance use related to nicotine, which means that you could go to your pediatrician and say, my 16-year-old is really struggling with vaping, wants to stop, can we get some help? Can you write a prescription for some lozenges, for the patch, to be able to allow them that opportunity to help? Nicotine withdrawal can be horrific and challenging to go through. It comes with the mood changes, headaches, nausea, changing in eating and sleeping patterns. And so this becomes a whole physical system impact, and getting really creative about ways that we intervene, app-based programs as well as medical providers.
Yep, I'm glad you brought that up. So what do we do here at Anoka-Hennepin? I am really happy to say that Anoka-Hennepin has some great chemical health support. We have Hazel and Betty Ford that supports our students on an individual basis, and we have Know the Truth that offers group support for substance use issues. And if there's anybody that would like more information or like to be part of either of those programs, I would say reach out to your school social worker or your school counselor for a referral. You can also reach out to me, and I can help direct that conversation and get you in touch with the appropriate people. And also, I would recommend you go to the Chemical Health webpage. There's a lot of information on there. There is nothing worse than when you go to a webpage, maybe the links don't work or the stuff's old. I'm very proud to say that this is pretty updated. So definitely go there. Look at the blogs, look at the information, look at the resources that we have in the community. All right.
Next.
Thank you, Cindy and Colleen, very much for sharing that information. I know we talk a lot, and every time I hear you guys have a conversation or talk, I learn so many new things. Some of the takeaways I had, and as I was thinking as you were talking, was some of the statistics and knowing and understanding that not everyone is using, even though the perception is there. And then also, I heard through what you were talking about a lot of just shifting our language and our thoughts and our conversations about stigmas and the conversations that we have with ourselves about the things that we think about other people, and also how we can have those conversations with our kids. Not that one time and check the box and it's done, but about all of the topics about being a parent, just continuing to have small conversations when you can have those conversations. I think that's really important. So thank you so much for sharing that information with us tonight. Absolutely. Now I'd like to invite forward our panel of community members and students and staff to join us to answer some of the questions that were shared and put onto the registration documentation. So panel members, please come forward. Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. It's an honor to meet some of you and to see some of you again. So we're going to begin by sharing, if you wouldn't mind, just sharing a little bit about yourself and why, your name, yourself, and why this work is important to you. Colleen, we'll start with you.
Sure. Colleen O'Neill, Chemical Health Prevention Specialist for the district. This work is important to me. It's important to help support our young people. It's not easy being young. I think we can all agree, for those of us older. And we know how difficult that is to navigate. So I think it's, me. Okay, I'm the oldest. But I love being able to have those conversations with students, with young people. I love being the one that maybe isn't so emotionally involved, that can really help give them some really solid information that they might pay attention to, because I'm not their parent. I don't think my kids would say the same thing, but anyways,
Thank you.
yeah.
Hi, I'm Heidi Geis, and I am a social worker at Blaine High School, and I think this is all important because it looks at looking at children holistically. They go through a lot. Being a high schooler is hard work, and this is just an important piece that links to other pieces, and it's just part of providing that additional support and buildings beyond the academics.
I'm Cindy Doth, a licensed alcohol and drug counselor and professional clinical counselor with Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation, and I really, I become passionate about all this because I love the opportunity to help, to be able to help redirect or change someone's trajectory, offer them some support and guidance is really my why and what keeps me going.
My name is Allie Eckergren. I am a student at Champlain Park High School, and part of the reason this is so important to me is because it affects me directly and indirectly in my personal life and at school. So I think if I can help parents and students have a different perspective, that's all I want.
Hi, I'm Jessica Kohler. I am an Anoka-Hennepin parent of 3 kids, 2 of which are, well, one's in college now and one's in high school, but I'm their adopted mother, and their biological mother had passed from an accidental overdose. So I've really seen a different side of addiction and the long-term effects and what it can do to children down the road.
Hi, I'm Justin Weller. I am a deputy with the Anoka County Sheriff's Office, and I currently serve as the school resource officer here in the district for Andover High School. And this issue is important to me because I'm tasked with keeping students safe, and I believe in enforcing the law when it comes to substances and using the law to keep kids safe. So.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing. We just have a wide breadth of people on the panel with a lot of expertise and a lot of passion for really supporting our students and our parents and our community. So thank you so much for being here tonight and sharing your wisdom with the audience. We're going to start with you, Colleen. The first question that we have is, as in the presentation, we talked about this a little, but it looks like the data that presented is not everyone is using substances. But it seems like that, but from what students are sharing, a lot of times they seem to say that everyone is. Are you seeing that, and what do you see from your lens and your role with Anoka-Hennepin?
Absolutely. I mean, when I meet with kids and we just kind of talk about what's going on in their lives, I hear that often. So I think it kind of goes back to what we shared in the beginning of the presentation, the perception. And just when a student does say, well, everybody is using, I say, okay, let's just talk about that. And of course, then, I pull out my data, and then they look at me like, yeah, okay, data. But I think what's important about the data, like we had indicated, it's not just the Anoka-Hennepin data, but it's also the national data. And it's also important to understand that there is such a there's so much difference between the numbers that even if we factor in some of those things that the students are saying, the numbers are still really different than what the belief is. And I also remind students, let's look beyond those closest friends. For parents, I always try to remind them, let's not just, I don't want to say not believe what your student's saying, but get your facts.
Thank you, Colleen. Heidi, the next question's for you. I know that you are a social worker at Blaine High School, which is one of our 5 traditional high schools in Anoka-Hennepin, and then we have alternative schools and some other schools that students might attend at the high school level. But what are you seeing as some of the biggest challenges that students are experiencing in high school? I know that's a loaded question.
It is. Wow. Yes. Thank you for that. So I think this year is kind of an anomaly, right? We know our kids are transitioning back and there's a lot. And so it's really just that transition back into school that kids are struggling with. So it's kind of that push and pull of they're super excited to be with their friends, but they're also emotionally drained by the time we get to the end of the day, because that's kind of a new format for a lot of them because we had such a gap. So a lot of struggles with just basic mental health stuff, a lot of anxiety, a lot of classroom avoidance, things like that, because it's just hard. Like, it's really hard. And so as we're kind of moving through the year, you can see everyone kind of pick up their skills. A lot of us in the support staff are working really hard with those coping skills and reminding kids things they might know, or teaching new skills for them to help kind of pull them out and draw them back into the classroom and being engaged in really healthy and positive ways. They're going to get through this. We all are. But this is just a challenging year. They'll make the strides, though.
Thank you, Heidi. Cindy, the next question is, in the presentation, we talked a little bit about risk factors and protective factors, and some of those, like you guys mentioned, are big words that may be clinical words that we don't use in our day-to-day language. Can you share a little bit more about risk factors and protective, see, I can't even say the words, about risk factors and protective factors and what they mean and why they are important?
Yep. Oftentimes when I'm talking with students, I use an acronym of FACTS, F-A-C-T-S, as a way to identify risk factors. So family relationships can increase our risk. Age of first use increases our risk. Having cravings, really wanting something, having an increase in tolerance, where what I used to use now doesn't make me feel the same way. I need more to achieve that same kind of effect. And then the surroundings that I'm in. And I think it's important to recognize that those the 5 things, that if they're present, can increase the potential for somebody's use. Ideally, the goal would be then, if we're starting to recognize some risk factors, what are the things that we can do to build up the protective factors? The factors that we can put around, that we can help teach, that we can really emphasize to help kind of change that trajectory just a bit, to either delay use or to have somebody who might be at a significant risk to not use at all. And so protective factors being those relationships, I think is one of the biggest things that I would really encourage anyone to focus on. I have a lot of other clinical words that we could use, but really it's using the things that really looking at the person as an individual and identifying what works for them, and let's build this up rather than trying to cut stuff out. Like, let's do what we know is already working for this young person.
Allie, you're a high school student, and as Colleen mentioned earlier, and I think everyone in the room can agree, and people online, that being a high school student is a lot different than a lot of us that are participating today from when we were in school. So we're wondering if you can share a little bit more about what you see and hear in school related to substance.
Yeah, so I think in the presentation it hit a lot of the points. It's a lot about vaping now. That's the thing I hear the most about. And it's affected me in like the bathrooms especially. And I hear it like in the hallways and everywhere. It just feels like it's like, here, vaping. And it's just like the whole school is buzzing about it all the time. And I think it's also the thing that it feels like everybody is using. And, you know, if kids are saying they're going to go to a party, it's like expected. There's going to be some vaping or alcohol or something there. And that's kind of fuels the thing that everybody who's going to be at that party is going to be using it. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I know when you're not in the high schools, I'm not in the high schools each day like you and Heidi are, but you kind of forget like what is happening and what in the day of life is the high schooler like. So thank you for sharing that information, Allie. Jessica, you shared a little bit about your story when you were introducing yourself. And we know that you have a unique lens on the world of addiction with what your story is and where you are today. Can you share a little bit about how this has influenced you as a parent?
Yeah, I think at the beginning, so I was 21 years old when I adopted my 2 kids after their mom passed, and they were 2 and 5 at the time. And I was just really self-conscious about never knowing the right thing to say or the right people to connect them with or the right way to parent in this situation. And I've really come to realize in the past how old am I? 35, 14 years. I've kind of just turned to like a no BS approach. Like that's why I get along with Colleen and Cindy so well, because it's just like, we're just gonna hit this head on and be honest and open and talk about it. And I think that really allows my kids to come to me and call when they're in when she said that, like, then they know they can call you and you're not going to shame them. You're going to say, okay, good. I'm glad you could make that decision. So I really like that. I really like just being an open book and really having those lines of communication open. I've also been subbing lately in the past couple months at high schools and elementary schools. And I kind of do that in my classrooms as well. It's kind of like the school of life, right? I'm like, you know, if someone keeps asking me to go to the bathroom, I'm going to flat out say, well, why do you want to go to the bathroom so many times? You know, I mean, you can kind of keep it lighthearted, but also like let people know that let the students know that you know, you weren't burned yesterday and you know what's going on. So that's a good lead up to you.
Justin, you are in the school each day and then also work in Anoka County as well. We know that this is the third trimester and we know that graduation's happening. We know that prom's coming up. There's a lot of change that's happening in people's life and transition. If a student is found using substances either in school or out of school, can you explain a little bit about what happens and how does that affect me as a student, right? Like if I'm in a sport or activity, what does that mean?
Okay, so as we're talking about consequences for using substances, I'm just going to brush on a couple because there's so many consequences I could talk about. I could be up here forever talking about it. So I'll start out with the school. So in school, if a student is caught in school using a substance, not only could it be criminal, where I would deal with it as a criminal investigation if it's a controlled substance like a marijuana vape, or even worse if it was like an opioid or some other drug, some other hard drug, I would investigate that as a criminal investigation if it came to me. But separate from that, the school would deal with it and there would be school consequences for that student possessing that controlled substance in school. Also related to school, and this would be in school or pertain to a violation in school or out of school, would be the Minnesota State High School League. So if that student was involved in a Minnesota State High School League sport or activity, there is a code of conduct for the Minnesota State High School League. And so if something happens out of school with a substance, even something as minor as a tobacco violation, but a lot of times what it would be like an alcohol violation. Us as law enforcement, we are by statute required to report that to the school. So we would then, what I do is I have a form letter, I would submit that letter to the school would become aware of it, and at that point the school would report it to the Minnesota State High School League. So a consequence there would be that student would have to go by that code of conduct and be suspended or removed from that sport or activity. In the community, stuff happening, talk about this time of year as we move into graduation time, prom, all those celebrations. Alcohol is prevalent, so that's a substance that I'm really worried about students abusing, because what do a lot of people do when they are using alcohol? They get behind the wheel, make a bad decision behind the wheel. So something I've seen in my almost 14-year career now, around this time of year into the summer months, is a lot of juveniles getting into really bad car crashes that involve alcohol. So another consequence is somebody getting hurt really bad, but also the criminal consequences for that. And with juveniles, a lot of people, I talk in driver's ed class, even if the juvenile is not, and I'm air quoting right now, intoxicated, they have a little bit of alcohol. There's a law in Minnesota called not a drop law, which would suspend their license for a period of time and then also have some other criminal type sanctions with the juvenile route. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that information. I know my kids are young, so I'm not at that stage, but I think that a lot of parents are curious, especially knowing that these big celebrations and events are happening, and we know that things do happen. Colleen, I know in the presentation you had talked about not only having the one 60-minute conversation, but having multiple conversations with your kids, not even about substance use, but about all of the things, right? Do you have any tips for parents if they're concerned about their child using and maybe they haven't had that conversation, or it is sometimes a very difficult conversation to have with anyone about using substances? What should I do if I'm feeling that way as a parent?
That's a big question, too, because that really all depends on how that presents itself, right? So I would say the first thing is check yourself. Check yourself and make sure that you bring your emotions down because, and this is hindsight, but pull yourself back. It's not something that needs to be addressed in that moment more often than not. And approach it later that day or the next day even, when you can have a conversation rather than have a screaming match. And I think it's also important to use I statements. Make it about your concern for them instead of putting the blame on them. So instead of you did this or why did you do that, make it more about I am concerned, I am worried, I would like to know more. So, those are two key things, but I think the biggest thing is not addressing it when you're heated. But I also think it's important that you kind of arm yourself, or you get your own information before you have that conversation, and do your due diligence. Connect with those at school. Connect with your pediatrician. Connect with friends, family, and arm yourself so when you're in that conversation, you've got some information that you can share as well. As far as school goes, just know that there are supports available in the buildings. And so again, going to your social worker, going to your counselor, going to a trusted adult. I don't want our supports to necessarily always be looked at as consequences because it's support. It's support. And if we as parents always use that support as a consequence, of course they're not going to share. Of course they're not going to want to do anything. So I think it's just really important that we approach it from that way.
Thank you, Colleen. I'm going to take those tips and put them in my pocket. Heidi, can you tell us a little bit more about the students that you serve? I know that it's one of our high schools, as I mentioned last time, and give some examples of the challenges they experience and the barriers that there might be towards their academic success.
Wow.
I know. You get really the big questions. Just, yeah.
Okay.
We know you can do it, and you're very
Okay.
articulate. So.
All right. Students I serve. The wonderful part about being a social worker is I get to see all the students. So I see kids from everything from, like, they're having a really bad day because a relationship went south, right? So kind of really minor but big to them things, to really, really big, significant family change, things going on outside of school, and kind of everything in between. As related to this, I'm often one of the first contacts along with school counselors for students. We've tried to offer really safe places for kids to go and have those open and honest discussions, and also hold them accountable, because as not their parent, we can kind of poke and prod at questions that don't set them off quite as rapidly as maybe somebody at home does. Mm-hmm. I work really closely with Colleen, with Cindy, with Know the Truth, with our other support programs to kind of get kids connected. And like Cindy was saying, not see them as consequences, but see them as building blocks. If we build them now, when you're an adult, you'll have those to fall back on, because those are developed skills. So really trying hard to help kids get in contact with those supports, and then support them while they're being supported. That's a lot of support in a statement, but I hope you know what I'm trying to say. So yeah, I think it's just very important to make those connections.
We all need support, so I think using that word a lot is really great. Yes. Cindy, kind of going off of what Colleen had said, as a parent, if I want to have a conversation with my kid, how do I do that? But if my child or someone in my family is using, can you talk a little bit about what treatment looks like and what are some affordable options for families?
Yeah, one of the things that I oftentimes will coach families on is where to even then start. We can have these ideas about, oh my goodness, my young person needs to go to treatment, and treatment then can sound like residential treatment. And the reality is that one of the best places to start is, even before that, to have an assessment. to go to a professional, to be able to have them take a look at the young person's life in a whole variety of different areas, right? Look at them medically, emotionally, spiritually, around their substance use, to really see them as a whole, to then make the best recommendations for that person. And treatment could be a part of that, and there's a whole variety of treatment options. There's outpatient, individual therapy, there's like a day treatment kind of program, but it's during the day and you're at home at night, or there's even residential as an option. And there's lots of factors that go into play. So I would really stress, start off with an assessment. And even then, how do we get connected with an assessment? Best place to go would be on the back of your insurance card, is to be able to call that number and say, I need an assessment. Who are the providers in my area that could help me with that? If there isn't any insurance present, then being able to call the county. The county will always help you find other providers that can work with you so that funding is not a barrier to access an assessment and therefore then getting the right level of care that you need. There has been such a push pre-COVID and even now more so in a COVID world of eliminating those barriers to access. And so that anybody who's needing the help can get there.
Thank you. Allie, can you tell us one of the things or a couple of the things that you think that teens should know in order not to use?
Yeah, so I think definitely one that we've talked about like a million times now is that not everybody is using, and teens can feel pressured to use when their friends are using, and I think they need to know that it's not as glamorous as it seems. I think especially with the current media that we have, it can seem like something that's really cool and fun, and like it can seem like a lot better than it actually is, and it causes a lot of real problems. And I think especially too with teens, like it affects their brain a lot more than they think it does. So.
Wow, that was more profound than.
Very profound. That was good. Romanticizing, right? Romanticizing the idea of what it looks like. That's right.
Jessica, as a parent, what are some of the measures that you're taking to help keep your children and maybe their friends from avoiding substances? And what do some of your conversations look like? I know you said you're straight to the point. Can you give us some examples of that?
Don't do drugs. No, I'm just kidding. I think that the proactive approach. I think it's really important. I express this to my kids and their friends to ask for help and then to accept the help and to know that it's not shameful, but it's proactive and mature to do. I do agree I'm such an advocate for these safe spaces in the elementary schools and middle schools and high schools where students can go to just like take a brain break or learn different coping skills, because I think that a lot of times that's all it is. It's like, let's redirect this into something that, we can take this energy or this anxiety or these emotions and let's channel it into something really positive instead of kind of just thinking about an easy microwave society quick fix like addiction or substance use.
Thank you. Justin, I'm going to pivot a little bit on your next question. So I know you brought some examples of things that you wanted to share with the audience and with the people online. And then I'm also curious, going back to what Colleen had said in the presentation, if you know a little bit more about synthetic nicotine and if there was anything you wanted to add to what Colleen and Cindy had shared on the slide.
So I know some basic things based on a couple trainings that I've done about synthetic nicotine. So my understanding is synthetic nicotine is also referred to as a nicotine salt. And also, it's basically, it comes in fluid form, and a lot of times where I see it when it's brought to me to dispose of because it was taken off a juvenile, it'll be in liquid form, and something like I have a little visual aid right here. I can walk around and show everybody and actually get it closer to the camera if we need to. So my understanding is it's a very concentrated form of nicotine. Also, when you think of a synthetic nicotine in a vape pen, that user is using that vape pen over and over again, unlike where you think of a cigarette, traditional tobacco cigarette, where you have to go outside to take a smoke break, and it's all metered because it's one cigarette, so that's the volume you're going to get, versus having a vape in your pocket all the time with a synthetic that's much more concentrated, and taking puff after puff after puff and not even knowing how much you've used. So that's what
Candy, like
it does.
That one? Like
yes.
they add, I mean, it looks like candy.
Yeah. So I can walk around right now, and is there a second part to the question after that, I think, or and then answer the rest of the question after
No, that was great. If you want to, that would be great.
And I'd also like to share about, I see on there that we were talking about the Delta 8 and the CBD products. I'd like to kind of address that, but first I can walk around and
You can,
kind of
let's
show
go into
this.
that, and then you can
Okay.
show us after
Okay.
that. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about the Delta 8 and what that means?
Okay, so CBD products right now are not regulated by the federal government or our state government in the sense that they're not limiting the age. I guess they're regulated, but they're not limiting the age. There's no age limit like there is to purchase tobacco now is 21. But to purchase CBD is not on that same. I haven't found any statutes in most of the jurisdictions that I serve. Don't even have a city ordinance about CBD. And Delta 8 is a form of CBD where, in my understanding, again, I'm no expert on this, I'm not a chemist to explain the compounds or anything like that in it, but my understanding of it, this is layman's terms, is that Delta 8 is a legal substance, a legal form of CBD where they use the hemp plant. They have it under, the THC levels are low enough for the state of Minnesota, for example, to be legal in the state of Minnesota. However, they've concentrated another part of the cannabinoids in that product. And how it was explained to me, it was a psychedelic compound that they've concentrated to the point now when you use that Delta 8 CBD in vape form, it will get the user high. So that is not
Anyone
regulated.
can buy that?
Yes. And as you drive around, if you drive past any tobacco shop in the area, some of the vape shops in the area, you'll actually see the neon sign in the window that says Delta 8 sold here.
And billboards.
And billboards, yes.
Yeah, I mean, billboards. Right outside Cobb is a huge sandwich board, Delta 8 available here. And the kids, I mean, it doesn't take much for the kids to recognize that and to know that they can use that. And in order to get high, they do need to use more, which can create additional problems to that as well.
Correct, that's my understanding, yes.
Is there anything as a community that we can do to support the efforts in the county or in the city?
I think at an even larger level, when we're talking about like CBD, I mean, I guess contact your legislator and say, like, if this is a concern, if CBD is a concern and we're worried about things like Delta 8, those are things that we can make laws on, and we can lobby to have laws for these so they can be enforced.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you want to, do you want to
Yeah.
grab the microphone, Clean, and you could walk those around? Clean, while he's sharing it with the people in the audience and Tim is able to zoom in on the camera, can you share a little, getting to the heart of the matter of it, what can we do to best provide support for students?
Wow. I would say the biggest thing is to allow them a safe place to have the conversation. And I think it's important to not react. I think it's important not to instill what you think they need to do or what they should do, but rather listen. I think we just need to learn as adults to spend more time listening and then asking the question, how can I support you? What would you like me to do to help you? That's the beauty in the work that I do. When I get to meet with kids, is just being able to listen to them and then just say, all right, so this is what I hear you saying, but now what would you like me to do to help support you?
Thank you.
Okay, so what I have here is a bunch of examples of different vape pens. Some of these are disposable pens. The Luna is a really common disposable one. They're sold at gas stations. A lot of the vape shops have this Loon. Basically, it's not refillable. use 300 puffs or whatever it's marketed to have. And then some of these other ones are rechargeable. What rechargeable means is they're both rechargeable. The battery is rechargeable, and then also it's rechargeable with the fluid, the nicotine salt fluid that I referred to earlier. The cartridge would be removed, and then it could be refilled with this fluid. Another thing that I've been coming across quite often is we talk about these rechargeable vapes where you can change out the cartridges or you can refill the cartridges. This is a cartridge that I've come into contact with a lot lately. A lot of juveniles have had this in their possession. This is called a Gold Coast, and this is what is a THC vape cartridge. And so as you can see, that cartridge basically will just basically has threads on it, and it will thread itself into a vape device, and then the user would then vape that THC fluid. This THC fluid is about 87% THC. To give you a good reference point, traditional leaf marijuana, like higher end or higher potency leaf marijuana now, is hovering between like 15 to 20% THC, and what we have here is almost 90%, just under 90% THC. So it's a very concentrated amount of THC that the user gets when they're vaping one of these cartridges. But this is a very common thing I'm seeing sold illegally in Minnesota. Obviously, I guess a drug dealer would be selling this in Minnesota. Some of these are bought or purchased out west in the states where it's legal, and then trafficked here. So, yeah.
It looks like an eye makeup container.
Yes.
The thing that I always find fascinating is how much vapes have changed and the look of it changes. So it looks more like something you would enjoy or a candy, and it's not always possible to know exactly what is the vape, what isn't a vape, what's a cigarette. Because you know what a cigarette looks like, you know what a cigarette smells like, but there's a lot of different ways to hide that.
I would also encourage everybody, these are just a couple examples. Do a Google search, image search on vapes. They've been really creative with them in the last couple of years. There's even somebody that's marketing, or a company that's marketing a hooded sweatshirt, and the drawstring on the hooded sweatshirt is a mouthpiece, and then so the vape device is located in the collar of the shirt with the battery and everything, and then all you have to do is pick up the tassel or whatever and vape off of it. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'll have to do a Google search after. Heidi, have you seen substance use impact students' grades, attendance, retention of information, and peer relationships? And I know we talked about COVID has also maybe changed that a little bit too. So again, you get kind of a loaded question.
Yes, I mean, absolutely, right? Like kids who are impaired or who are struggling with like mental health and substance use, like it impacts all of those things, right? Like it makes it hard to go to class. There's a lot of avoidance. There's peer struggles that come along when you're hanging out with a group of peers that are also using, right? Those aren't super stable or healthy relationships. So there's all those dynamics to kind of be in there. So absolutely, it has a negative impact, and really helping students, come to that realization and see how it's impacting them, and then help them to understand why it's important to make better choices, why grades are important, why graduation's important, why healthy relationships are important. So sometimes instead of attacking it, helping them have a vision for how to do it a little differently. So, yeah.
Cindy, I know you mentioned you saw a commercial recently about vaping, but can you describe some of the most important messages that you know can help parents guide their teens during this developmental stage of their life of curiosity, belonging, and experimentation? We know that that's part of what your brain goes through, right, as a human. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I oftentimes encourage parents to be curious, to get curious about what is it that their young person is already experiencing. Much like with what Colleen has already encouraged parents to do, is to really ask some of those questions of, what is it that you hear or see about, vaping, right? Or what are your experiences with it? What do people around you talk about all of this? And then putting some of that responsibility back onto that young person of what do you think that you'll do? What do you want to do? And really, as a parent, as a caregiver, to identify what is it that you value, much like with what Heidi was talking about, is identifying a value and helping your young person make those value-driven decisions. That it's hard to make some of those difficult decisions to start to use when it might not go along with the values that you have around graduation, around getting good grades, around being in activities and having events. And so for parents, it would really be around getting curious, having some of those conversations, and allowing that young person that safe place to talk it through. We're not telling them what to do. They have enough people in their lives telling them what it is that they need to do all the time. But having that dialogue of, what do you think that you're going to do? Here's what I would do. And it's not even about telling them what your own personal experiences are with substance use. That's not this kind of a situation to do that in. It's about, here's how I have said no in the past. Here's how I have not picked up in the past. And offering those kind of pro-social messages.
Allie, your question kind of goes along with what Cindy was saying. She's encouraging us as parents to be curious, but we know sometimes that our student or our youth don't want your own parent to be curious, right? So being young, and it seems like young people know way more than adults, like all of the things. They know way before we do of what's cool, what's trending, what we should be doing. So what is something that you would want parents to know?
I think parents need to make it clear to their teens that they are a safe space for having these conversations, because I think if teens think that their parents going to be mad at them or disappointed in them when they come to them with these issues, that they're not going to be able to get the support they need. So they need to know that their parents are going to be there for them and need to be able to curb their emotions and curb their own experiences to be able to help their teen in the ways that they need, not the ways that they think that they need.
So articulate. That's good.
Kind of along that same vein, Jessica, what do you think that parents need to know about vaping and substance use from your lens as a parent?
As a parent, I just think it doesn't discriminate. And I think parents need to give themselves grace. I might be sitting on this panel, but like last week I was, in the counselor's office at the high school with my son, and he was like, but just don't lose your, crap with me when I don't get my homework done. So, I'm no expert at parenting, that's for sure. But he knows at least, and I feel good that I've taught him to go to those resources and not feel shamed about it. And I also always try to remember that children must be taught how to think, not what to think. So the critical thinking skills in situations in life, instead of pointing our fingers and telling them, listening, and how are we going to make different decisions.
I think that that's so true of just not telling. I do that with my kids sometimes. I tell them what to do, and I'm really trying to retrain what I'm doing to think about how I can support them to have some of those building blocks that you guys have mentioned. So when they get older and continue on to become an adult, they have some of those tools that it's not just because I'm not going to be there always, right? Yeah. Justin, can you share with us some of the current city ordinances and policies related to adolescent use within the township or city limits?
Yeah, so the jurisdictions that the sheriff's office covers, I know most of their city ordinances, and most of them are fairly similar, and they mirror what the state statute says. So a lot of times I end up, when enforcing things involving controlled substances and substances such as vapes, which is the number one thing we deal with juveniles is vaping and tobacco products. The city ordinance mirrors exactly what the as a rule, as what the state statute says. And it was about a little over a year ago now when the age to purchase tobacco went up to 21 years old. First, it was federally mandated that it'll go, then the state followed that federal law that said 21 was the age. So when the state changed that law or that statute, I don't know if it was an oversight or why, but our interpretation, and I say our interpretation is not just my interpretation of the law, but our interpretation of the law is that statute only applies to the person procuring the tobacco product or nicotine product to the juvenile. So it would be the store selling it to them or somebody, another adult over 21 providing it for them. That would be the only act that's against the law. So therefore, the juvenile is not in violation of law if they're in possession of a tobacco or nicotine product. Unless there's a couple circumstances, unless they provided a fake ID to procure that product or something like that. So how we enforce that is compliance checks on the businesses. We're proactive with businesses that we get tips on. Tips are big for us because if there's a tobacco shop that a parent at one of our schools knows about that their kids or their kids' friends are purchasing at, we want to know about that because there's a lot of things we can do. I can sit there and watch that business and develop probable cause or even suspicion just to walk up and talk to somebody that looks young walking out of that business and then get a violation on the business like that. So that's kind of where the city ordinance kicks in, is that the city then civilly, that person has a license with the city or that business has a license with the city, and then there can be sanctions taken against that license to sell tobacco at the city level. So
when you were talking, it's almost 7:30, so we're gonna wrap up. As you were talking, I was thinking about just the importance of all of the work that each of you do each and every day, and thinking about the connection of family, school, community, and how we really all do need to work together to support our youth, because as we know, they're going to continue to grow and to become adults, and how we all do really need to work together to really support our students and for them to know that they have supports within the school, within their family, and within the community as well, so that we can be offering the most safe place for our youth to continue to grow and to flourish. So I just want to say on behalf of Anoka-Hennepin, I really appreciate all of you being here tonight and sharing your expertise and your wisdom. And I'm just blown away by all of the things you all shared, and I could probably listen to you talk for 3 more hours, to be honest, but I want to be aware of your time. Thank you to those of you who are here tonight in the audience, and also for those of you who are viewing on YouTube and view this information after today's evening. Please remember that there are resources in the community that are here to help you, and it is okay to talk about it. And if you're struggling, please reach out to someone and ask for help and let them know that you do need support. We have wonderful people in our district, in our community, that are willing to help. Lastly, we have our last Parent Engage event on April 19th at 6:30 at Anoka High School. It's titled How to Get Your Mojo Back After COVID-19 with Dr. Corey Martin. He did a presentation a couple months back, and this is a follow-up from the one he did. If you're available, it's free. It's going to be at Anoka High School, and it's also going to be streamed online. And then lastly, tomorrow you will receive, for those of you who registered, you will receive an email with the presentation, with the recording of the presentation as well. You'll receive some resources that Colleen talked about, and I know the Truth left some resources as well. Colleen's contact information will be there, and then also the website that you spoke about in the presentation as well, and the videos and things like that. So thank you so much to all of you for being here tonight, and you're amazing.